So, in case you missed it, we got a new episode of and I think it may genuinely be one of the best in the whole series, and I'm pretty excited to talk about it, especially since a lot of my predictions from my most recent predictions video ended up being accurate. So, just like the last few videos, I'm going to start with the spoiler-free review, then I'll go into some more spoilery talk afterwards. There will be time codes in the description if you want to jump around. Before we jump in, I just wanted to say thank you guys for helping this channel pass 1,500 subscribers. It's kind of surreal, but I really appreciate it. The support is very encouraging, so I will definitely be posting way more regularly now. If you want to help keep the train rolling, you should like this video and subscribe if you haven't. I'll continue posting new Invincible content every week and even more content once all of Season 3 is out, so you should definitely stick around. Alright, let's get into it. So we start the episode with a scene set during Season 1's finale, which shows us that this woman, whom Invincible tried to save, was actually Powerplex's sister, which is such a devastating detail to learn and a new addition from the comics that added a lot to this episode. Similarly, seeing Powerplex trying to get justice the correct and legal way was a great addition that shows us that Powerplex wasn't immediately irrational and genuinely spent a lot of time trying to do things the right way. I also really liked the scene with Powerplex in the GDA because it showed us a perspective that we haven't really seen before, and I thought it was really interesting just seeing them have small talk about Viltrumites and casually testing powerful weapons. The scene with Mark and Eve training Oliver and using the elephant as a dummy was pretty funny. Mark and Oliver truly feel like siblings in so many of their interactions, and that's just something I don't think you feel as much from their relationship in the comics. However, their conversation on the roof is just so well done. You really start to see where Oliver is coming from and the internal struggle Mark is having just from a conversation that feels so natural, which is really, really impressive writing. Also, side note, but Eve should be a therapist. She knows exactly what to say every time she needs to say something. I thought the scene where Powerplex is suited up in front of his wife was great. The discs actually puncturing into his skin and his wife hitting him with the sledgehammer were great additions that just made this scene feel that much more impactful. I think it's so fascinating to see his wife being such an enabler to the point she's willing to hit him in the head with a sledgehammer. It feels like the obvious or cliche route for a story like this is for the wife to be the one to reel the supervillain back in, which makes this such a great subversion, and it's also just done in a very believable way. I also really liked the scene of the Graysons having dinner and Paul trying to relate with them. The conversation him and Debbie have after dinner was very nice and plays into the themes of this episode brilliantly, but I'll come back to that in a bit. Also, another perfect example of how siblings interact with this little moment. Powerplex jumping off a building to build up kinetic energy was just brutal and shows how smart these writers are with these characters and their powers. I'm really glad we got to check in on William and Rick because I loved their dynamic with Mark. And seeing Mark and Amber interact again and being happy for each other was also a nice moment. And so was Mark making his priorities clear, but I'll come back to that. I think the title card for this episode may be the best title card drop in the entire series. It's hilarious, creative, and I may be alone in this, but I honestly thought it was just badass. I think the whole scene with Shapesmith was great and just did a great job of showing us more of Powerplex's character. And personally, I'm a big fan of Shapesmith's humor. The "this is your second punch" joke got a good chuckle out of me. I really liked Eve reminding Mark that he was a victim as well, and just the whole idea of Mark going to the memorial as Mark and not Invincible. Plus, another perfect moment of Mark and Oliver acting like siblings. The scene with Rudy giving Amanda the power belt thing honestly hit me a lot harder than I expected it to. Something about it just being such a genuine display of love from Rudy, and Amanda realizing that was very moving to me. Similarly, the whole conversation between Rex and Ray was also just brilliant. Just two characters at an impasse at the same time as their emotional climax. Brilliant writing here, and I'm so glad they kept Ray alive to build this relationship. I thought the scene at the memorial when Powerplex attacks was great, and Mark letting Eve help him out was a great character moment for both of them, especially Eve. I think it's awesome that Eve just figures out how his powers work very quickly. The scene with Powerplex in the transport van is again just another example of the writers really knowing what they're doing with using these characters' powers, and I'm a big fan of it. Mark and Eve talking at the memorial did wonders for the themes of this episode, but hey, I'll come back to that. I also really liked that Mark meets up with Donald. Donald is such a fucking G, dude. I was a little curious how he contacted him though. Like, do you think he just texted him or what? Anyways, the climax of the episode played out just about as perfectly as it could have, and it damn near brought me to tears. I think it goes without saying, but Aaron Paul absolutely killed it this episode. He brought so much emotion and humanity to just about every line Powerplex had, and more than delivered on all the big moments for the character, which is very impressive. Major props to him. I think the last little exchange between Mark and Powerplex was a great moment for Mark's character arc and where it's headed, which we're about to get into. The post-credit scene was so fucking dope and has me through the roof excited about next week's episode. Now, a little bit of a rant here, but I've seen quite a bit of people complaining about the designs of the alternate Invincibles, but these are quite literally just the designs from the comics and the show's art style. I do not understand why so many people expect the art style to change for specific events or episodes. It's kind of nuts. Like, the most common complaint I've seen about the alternate Invincibles is that they look less detailed. Yeah, because the art style for the show is less detailed than the art style in the comics. We already knew this. You should have been expecting that. I have a question for people who weren't expecting the alternate Invincibles to match the art style of the show. Did you think it was going to be like SpongeBob, where they have a few frames an episode that are really detailed and then just go back to the regular art style? Or did you genuinely think they would completely change the art style for just this episode? I mean, in order to have the expectation of the Invincibles being more detailed than the regular art style, than the regular Invincible in the show, you would have to assume one of those outcomes would be the case, right? I mean, Jesus, it's mind-blowing sometimes. Angstrom's disfigurement looks more detailed in the comics than in the show. Huh, I wonder why, man. Maybe it's because the comics are more detailed than the show. If you're just stating that to just state it, that's fine, but you're not really adding anything. And if you prefer the more detailed version, that's fine too. But to act surprised or act like this is unexpected is just kind of stupid, honestly. Okay, that's all. End of my rant and my review section. I think this is all around at least the top 3 episode of Invincible for the writing alone, which I would happy to break down for you. Breakdown time. Perspective. I feel like the central theme of this episode was perspective. Mark is at a point in his character arc where he's right on the cusp of changing his morality and priorities, which I've talked about a lot on this channel. He's going from seeing things as black and white or right and wrong to a much more morally gray outlook. He's been thrown in a lot of situations this season that have forced him to reconsider his morals, but this episode does so by making him see things from another perspective. Powerplex starts as just a regular person who seems like he was a good guy. From Mark's perspective, Powerplex is a survivor of his father's attack and someone that Mark saved. From Powerplex's perspective, he is a victim who lost everything at the hands of Mark and his father. Mark even claims that before this point, he hadn't truly thought about all of these people who were affected or considered their perspective. Mark is forced to question the unintended consequences of his heroic actions, realizing that despite his intentions, he can't save everyone. This realization forces him to confront the moral complexities of his role as a superhero, prompting personal growth and a deeper understanding of the weight his actions carry. If someone can become a so-called villain just because of something that happened to them during one of Mark's most so-called heroic moments, what does it really mean to be a hero or a villain? Especially considering that Powerplex believes he's in the right and believes he's doing good for this world. Additionally, I believe this situation puts him somewhat in the perspective that Cecil had earlier this season. Mark believed that he was in the right to attack Cecil for working with murderers, when in reality, Cecil just saved all of Earth's heroes because of it. Now Mark is being accused of being a murderer, when in reality, he saved the entire planet. Now, to make things even more complicated, you have Oliver. This conversation on the roof is the first time we really get to understand Oliver's perspective on their father. Oliver reminds Mark of the father they both knew, loved, and grew up with, and reminds them that their dad saved a lot of people. And despite Mark and Eve's attempts to explain why Nolan is still seen as a bad guy for what he did, Mark is still left questioning who his father really is. Is it the father he and Oliver loved and grew up with, or is he the Viltrumite that killed thousands in Chicago? Is his dad good or bad? The reality is that it's much more complex than that, which is what the show is trying to tell us and what the universe is trying to tell Mark. Things aren't so black and white. Even outside of Mark's story, this theme of perspective is reinforced through the conversation between Debbie and Paul. Paul explains how his day-to-day life doesn't live up to the daily life of a superhero, while Debbie reassures him that superheroes need to see that there's a world out there that's not all aliens and supervillains. This moment highlights the idea that perspective is shaped by experience and that both superheroes and regular people exist in vastly different realities. At this point in the story, Mark has already changed to some degree, mainly in his priorities. In the bowling alley scene, we see that Mark is not afraid to place heroism lower on his priorities than the people he cares about. However, Mark needs to see other perspectives and really see things from a different point of view before he can truly complete his arc and transformation, and this episode has done that exceptionally well. The intertwined narratives in this episode effectively portray how perspective shapes one's reality and how change is an inevitable response to personal experiences, emphasizing the moral complexities of being a hero and the impact our actions have. Alright, that's about all I've got for our breakdown section, so let's move it on into spoilers. So if you do not want anything spoiled for you from Invincible Season 3 or anything from the comics, I would just stop watching here. So I don't have too much to talk about spoiler-wise, but there are a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, I think the opening scene of this episode made me more excited for the Invincible War than anything else. Seeing the scale of the destruction from the point of view of someone on the ground really puts into perspective just how powerful and destructive Viltrumites could really be. And the fact that so many of our heroes are ground-level heroes makes me believe we're going to see some very similar scenes of destruction in the Invincible War, which has me pumped. As far as predictions, I don't really have any new ones. I still stand behind my most recent prediction video, especially after getting so much about Episode 6 right. I do think the scenes I mentioned for Episode 6 that we didn't see could still pop up in the Invincible War, though. For example, maybe Kate and Immortal are house shopping or discussing having a family when an Invincible attacks them, or Samson and Darkwing are having a heart-to-heart chat when an Invincible attacks them. I could be wrong, but I just think we need some setup that Kate wants kids, so there's a reason for Immortal to retire after he gets mollywopped. And I think we need to see some growth from Darkwing before he sacrifices himself. Though I don't think these scenes are super necessary, because I think a rework or more in-depth scenes of Immortal getting mollywopped or Darkwing sacrificing himself could be done without that setup. One theory I have seen that I like a lot is that the season finale will be a longer episode than all of the other episodes, because the season finale is releasing an hour earlier than all of the other episodes have. And that's really all the evidence there is to the theory, but I think it makes sense given what we're going to get in that episode. A longer episode would be super dope, and I think would just ensure that they're absolutely going to do Conquest justice. However, that could be wrong, so don't get your hopes up too much. Alright, I think that will do it for us today. Again, I really appreciate all the support you guys have shown in the last week. It's been awesome. If you want to help keep the train rolling and drop a like or subscribe, I would really appreciate it. I'll be back with more Invincible content weekly, and I'm working on some other video ideas as well, so you should definitely stick around. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.